field, or it's not a traditional department, it's an institute. And peace studies really is it's more of what we call an interdisciplinary complex. So it's kind of a space where any number of different disciplines across the humanities and the arts, the social sciences and natural science, as well as professional endeavors like business and various forms of development, kind of overlap and interact. And everybody's welcome, right? In the sense that all disciplines and professions are welcome, kind of insofar, and are relevant insofar as they contribute to the center of gravity, or the point of orientation, which is we say in kind of a formal definition, is the reduction of violence in all of its forms and the cultivation of justice in its multiple varieties. Okay, and that's kind of a very formal definition of what we mean when we use the term just peace, a term that kind of holds together the concepts of justice and peace in a single term. So, in as far as any field or discipline relates to this, it's relevant and participates. And so, as you might imagine, that makes things very interesting. That means we've got a lot to talk about and a lot of ground to cover in an Introduction to Peace Studies course. So, having said that, and offered that very kind of loose and formal definition to what peace studies is, I should also mention it's also kind of a realm of practice. So we don't just emphasize the formal investigation, the research, but also we discuss implementation and practice, and try to study these cases and themes and thinkers and concepts in terms of how we and they might be engaged in ways that make some positive and constructive difference for the world in the interest of just peace. Okay, so with that, I'm going to share my screen, and if I can get it here. What did I just do? 1 second. I know it's here somewhere. Did I just sign up my computer? I don't see. No. Okay. Let me see if I can. No. I just. Just a second. I don't understand why I'm having a problem with this. Okay, Laura, for some reason I'm not able to call up my.
Okay, Anna, does Jason need to be made a co-host? I'm wondering if when we opened up the session, if somehow the settings got changed.
He should be able to save or to share a screen. Yeah, sorry.
So I don't understand. I did it just a sec. Try again here.
Okay.
Did I?
Jason, do you want to try sending me your slides and I can put them up?
All right, while we get Jason's slides set up, we do have one question in Q&A, and maybe I will toss this one to Marty. So Marty, what has been your favorite part of the Notre Dame Peace Studies program?
Oh my gosh. Thank you. And thank you everyone for having me. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more in depth later, but I think the best thing about peace studies is the people and the academic space that we have in these programs. Every class I've taken has been filled with like extremely active, socially conscious, socially aware, insanely intelligent, and really fun students. I think that's just kind of the greatest thing is in this world, in this space of peace studies, the students that are in peace studies want to be in it and really, really care about the subject and care about talking about it and wrestling with these tough issues. And then on top of that, you have this fabulous staff at Kroc that is so willing to help and always be there and meet with you. And then obviously you have this great setup of professors who every professor I've had, I've still kept in contact with. It's been, you know, the readings, the videos, the discussions we have are so interesting and intellectually challenging in the best sense possible. Um, but also this really fun and exciting atmosphere where you're willing to discuss tough issues. You're willing to confront these challenges and talk about how to build peace in especially violent structures and systems. So it really is the people, and I know that's kind of vague, but no matter what aspect of Kroc you're working with or studying with, every person is just stellar and contributes to my learning so much more than if I just studied it alone.
Great, thanks so much, Marty. And Ian, I was wondering if you might be willing to comment on that too, given that you've now got kind of the backward 2020 vision on the program.
Yes. So for me, I think one of the best things about peace studies at Kroc is the fact that it is interdisciplinary. I was able to take a lot of interesting courses, and they've stayed with me. Like I took a lot of classes at Notre Dame, but the ones that I did for peace studies really have stuck with me, and have impacted the way I think about a lot of things. I would say the course I took on psychology and peace studies was one of my most interesting ones. And it was focused on how to raise human beings that are just and that are moral. And that has really impacted how I think about childhood education, early childhood education, and parenting. And those are things at the time, like I wasn't really particularly interested in, but but I knew that in the future, that's something that would be relevant for me. And it also helped me kind of reflect on my childhood and what could have been done differently, and what was done so well that I would want to take it forward, and how it reinforces like how to be a moral and just person. And of course, Professor Spring's class on Intro to Peace Studies and Restorative Justice, like that was really impactful for me. And I'll talk about this a little more later, but thinking about how do we center the needs of victims and what they consider justice, was it was a thing that stayed with me because of, with the uprisings last year, thinking about what policing looks like in communities and how do we actually make sure that we're getting justice for people who suffer from gun violence, whether it's from the police or in their communities. So, thinking about, victims and centering them was something that was introduced to me in Professor Spring's class, and just going forward and having that be something that I return to when I think about what justice looks like for me and my community.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. I think that Jason is ready with his PowerPoint now, so we're going to turn back to Professor Springs. And I put this in the chat, but I'll say it out loud too. Please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A as we go, and as we have opportunities to weave those into our conversation, we will do so. Over to you.
You're muted, Jason.
Yeah, got it. Okay, and how about now? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
And you can see my screen?
We can.
Holy cow. All right. Well, it wouldn't be a Notre Dame event that I participate in if I weren't having problem with technological things. So here we go. All right. So to pick back up where I left off, and thank you for your patience, everyone. So I wanted to just kind of overview or talk about why peace studies is a particularly compelling, meaningful field to work in, both with reference to the intro class I'll be teaching, but then also more broadly, kind of conceptually about how we go about covering so many topics, subject matter, fields in peace studies, and keep it in a kind of coherent manner. All right, so I thought I'd start with a question: what can you study in peace studies, as kind of the hook? And the answer is all. As in peace studies, you can study it all. Okay, and what I mean by that? Well, let me start with the particular and talk about what I'll cover in my introduction to peace studies class, in the sense in which it is kind of covering it all. I call my peace studies class my 31 flavors class, as in the 31 flavors of Baskin Robbins, because in some sense it's kind of an impossible class to teach. We cover so much that is central and relevant to peace studies. It's absolutely crucial that I liken it to inviting the class into a Baskin Robbins restaurant and giving them each a little taster spoon of each of the 31 flavors in the Baskin Robbins, right? In the sense that, as I laid out the various topics that I'll cover in my intro class, it moves from just war theory to nonviolent social change, the U.S. civil rights movement, and how that relates to the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Lives Matter uprisings of 2020. Structural violence, cultural violence, intersectional peace building, addressing specifically the ways that race, ethnicity, gender, and class manifest in various forms of violence, how they can be engaged in ways that can build peace, conflict resolution versus conflict transformation, international institutions and norms like the United Nations, human rights, genocide prevention, International Criminal Court, and Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, restorative justice and U.S. mass incarceration and police reform in the U.S., peace through business and development, microloans and microfinance, and sanctions. So how, if this is like a 31 flavors class, my Baskin Robbins class, how can you study all of that without ending up with a kind of peace studies milkshake, something that's almost impossible to keep coherent in shape and form? And so from the particularities of the subject matter of my own class, I thought I'd like to introduce the concept by which we at the Kroc Institute and in the Peace Studies program try to hold all of these different dimensions in a coherent and integrated whole. And that's the concept of strategic peace building. So this is kind of the image that we have developed at the Kroc Institute for thinking about all the ways that all of these different fields and subfields and subjects bear upon the building of peace and the cultivation of justice. Okay, we call it the strategic peace building wheel. You see it covers different kinds of justice over there on the upper right segment, covers things like policy and engagement of government, resources, nonviolent social change, education, development, law, transnational and global threats. So let me break it down for you. Just take a moment or two. Talk about strategic peace building pathways. Well, the inner circle of the peace building wheel conveniently kind of makes a peace sign, and that's intentional, by the way, and kind of describes the different thirds of which the outer ring breaks down to: justice and healing, violence prevention, conflict response and transformation, and structural and institutional change and development. So if we break these down a little bit further, this segment, in peace studies, we address past harms through processes like restorative justice, transitional justice, trauma healing, and humanitarian action. We address current violence and conflict through humanitarian action, government efforts, nonviolent social change, conflict resolution and conflict transformation, as well as education. And we focus on transforming structures and institutions for purposes of justice and peace. And this comes also through education, as well as global development, dealing with transnational and global threats, and various forms of law. Okay, so this is kind of the broader way we integrate these concepts in a coherent way. So let's look a little more specifically. We talk about restorative justice. We focus in on addressing historical harms against Indigenous people, community-based restorative justice, prison system reform, especially in the US, but in international settings as well, national truth and reconciliation commissions. Talk about transnational justice, national and local justice, international criminal court, various forms of trauma healing, such as child soldier reintegration and victim support. And then humanitarian action, such as human rights protection, humanitarian advocacy. All of these things are topics that we kind of organize around this focus on past harms on the strategic peace building wheel. We move then to current violence and conflict in the segments of the wheel that focus on these issues. You can see we kind of focus in on human rights protection, humanitarian relief and aid, humanitarian advocacy and law, public health work, as well as civil military relations and government peace processes, policy analysis, and post-conflict reconstruction, nonviolent social change, active nonviolence, community organizing, media, journalism, and writing, and then in conflict resolution, talk about mediation and reconciliation, arts-based work for social transformation, interfaith and interethnic dialogue, violence prevention programs, and then in education, adult and civic education, community-based learning, vocational study. And then over here on the structural and institutional change side, we applied gender lens, race and ethnicity lenses to peace and conflict in terms of intersectional peace building, educational reform initiatives. We investigate structural violence. In development, we look at various forms of economic development, gender equality work, housing and urban development, human and social development, local and international development, microfinance and small business development. And then dealing with threats of war, nuclear and small arms proliferation, poverty, hunger and homelessness, terrorism, so on and so forth, human trafficking, human rights violations, genocide and mass violence. And finally, in the sector of law, look at human rights law, indigenous solidarity and rights, family law, and domestic violence, immigration law, land issues. These are not exhaustive, but I'm trying to break down the strategic peace building wheel to give you a sense of all the different ways that the interests that you bring can plug into what it is we cover in this interdisciplinary complex of peace studies. Again, this is the strategic peace building wheel, how we try to keep it coherent for the purposes of not just the intro class that various of us teach, but also the other requirements. So where do you fit into the wheel? Where might you fit into the wheel if you have some interest that brings you here today? The question is, I can guarantee you fit in somewhere. These are the various departments and majors that have found ways to relate rather urgently and immediately to what it is we study in the Peace Studies classes and the Peace Studies program. I think maybe I left business off, but we get a lot of business majors as well who find ways in paths through the strategic peace building configuration. But as you can see, from law to history to art, theology, biology, pre-med, education, anthropology, engineering, it all fits, it all relates to peace studies conceived as an interdisciplinary complex. So the question is not where you might fit, but other questions that are relevant. What do you care about? What are you curious about? What areas do you want to learn more about, and how would you like to change the world? So what will you study in peace studies? The question I opened with. And in peace studies, you design your own path through the issues, cases, concepts, themes, and thinkers. And then, yes, you can study it all. Okay, I think that covers it. So I will stop my contribution there and Laura, let you pass it on.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate that, the broad perspective and the great kind of reflection of the themes that are central to the Kroc Institute. So maybe next I will turn it over to Marty for a little bit just to talk about why you chose peace studies as a major and what you valued about it, and particularly thinking kind of to Anne's point about interdisciplinary and that being a really key kind of feature of the peace studies program, how it's kind of helped and augmented your experience as a sociology major, since that's your primary major.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, I do not have a PowerPoint, so you're going to have to stare at my face the whole time, but we'll get through it. The first thing I want to say, and this is for the participants questioning whether to study peace, take the intro class. Just take it, try it out. You will love it. And you will get into this really cool atmosphere with 20 plus other students, and you'll fall in love. That's kind of where I came from. Was I was unsure about doing peace studies. I was unsure if I wanted to do it. I knew I would like it, but I didn't know if I could fit it in. I still don't know if I can fit it in, but I have to, because it is just that good. So that is my kind of overall advice, is just take it, the intro class, and really you get to kind of learn all this stuff about peace. And even if that's the only class you take, you will still learn so much. So why I chose to study peace kind of came out of that intro class and came out of the topics that I learned in that intro class. One is such a cool major, and it's such an interesting, like Anne said, interdisciplinary, which I'll talk about, major, where there are so many people from so many different worlds in academic places coming together to talk about peace. And what a kind of fascinating story that is a bunch of students coming together to talk about peace with a really fantastic Kroc staff and professors who have dedicated their lives to making the world more peaceful. And so, like I said before, everyone who is there really wants to be there and really wants to learn a lot. So because of that, there's these really dynamic, fascinating classrooms. But more about peace studies in general and what I kind of get from it and why I keep studying it is because it really is a framework for understanding the world. It influences everything from how I think day to day to how I think about social issues to, you know, how I view my place at Notre Dame and in the world and post-grad. You know, whether it's looking at world affairs or looking at things in the local contexts, you know, we really in peace are looking not just on how to prevent violence, but how to pursue justice. And once again, that is just a fantastic idea, because when we think of peace, we think just non-war times, which, you know, that is part of it, is the lack of violence, but peace studies also teaches how to build structures and systems of justice and structures of peace. Which again, people come from different disciplines, which I'll talk about. But with so many different backgrounds, there's so many different classes you can take and so many different sectors of peace studies that you can really get into. So I know there's a lot of people who are fascinated by religion and peace building and how religion can kind of aid in that. There's a lot of people that have a lot of skills and knowledge and passion about international relations and development and kind of how that works. There's a lot of intersectional classes that specifically deal with the lenses of class, gender, race, sexuality. Personally, I'm fascinated by nonviolent social change and activism and social organizing. So those are kind of the classes I tend to take and tend to deal with. All these classes, you know, intersect and deal with all these issues. There's just some that kind of have more of a focus than others. But you really can find kind of in that wheel Professor Springs was talking about, you can really find your niche in peace studies and really can, not even in the lens of peace study, something more specific that you are really, really focused on. So in my time, I've studied working with nonviolent change and how to build a social movement and kind of how peace can influence that, looking at past social movements. I've taken a class on contentious politics and how to build social movements. So when a country is in a really heated bipartisan or bipolar system, how can we work to build social movements to change that political system? I've also taken a class on the social organization of secrecy and deception, which was fascinating, which is, again, one of those classes that is connected to peace studies that is just so cool. And you get to learn about peace through deception, how that's used and how we can really break that down. And so that's kind of been my space in peace studies, is nonviolent social change. But again, there are so many sectors of peace that we have so many classes that we can take and learn more and more. To kind of go back to the interdisciplinary approach, every class I'm in peace studies has 18,000 different majors and different interests within that. And that's so great because everyone brings their understanding of sociology, psychology, business, art, but through this lens of peace. And it's really this interesting dynamic of building a more peaceful system through multiple opinions and definitions of peace and how that works in their experience and their expertise. So for sociology, we learn a lot about how to see the world, how to understand it, and to see how the structural functions of society shape how people act in the world. So what causes, structures, systems, cultures are making people act certain ways. That's what I learned in sociology. Peace studies provides this framework that goes, okay, yes, this is how the world works. How can we change it to make it more just and more inclusive and more intersectional in thought? So I'm learning how society works in sociology, but then coming to peace studies and learning how to change it and how to make it better, more peaceful, more just, in a way that includes everyone, is more equitable. So again, it's this, but then there's people who take psychology who learn this is how people think. And then the peace studies kind of comes in. Okay, how can we take that and make people look at the psychology of peace, which Professor Miller-Graff, I know, is very much into in her research and looking at that. There's people that come from Mendoza that look at, okay, how can we reshape the idea of business and make it more equitable, not just within the systems we have, but breaking these systems and thinking outside the box of how can we create a new, different type of business that works for the society and works to build peace. So kind of, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. But again, my biggest advice would be just take the intro class or take another class. You will go into a classroom with a really energetic professor, really energetic students, and you will be so mesmerized by how awesome peace studies is. And I think that's kind of the thing, is I was so happy to do this because it has really changed. I hate when people say like, this has changed my life, but it really has changed my life and making me think happier, making me think in a more equitable and fair way, and understanding that, we can really, as students and as postgrads and as young people, really change the world through the lens of peace. So that's kind of all I have for right now. So yeah, thank you once again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Marty. I think you spoke really nicely to how peace studies can build on core themes within your major, but also give you lots of opportunities to explore and deepen in new areas. And it ties in a little bit to one of the questions we received. So there was a question about whether or not there are specific concentrations. We don't have formal concentrations within the supplementary major and minor, but as Marty indicated, we have lots of kind of rich related classes in particular areas. So within that wheel that Professor Springs presented, if there's an area that is of great interest to you, we offer opportunities in the major and in the minor to kind of deepen your experiences through specific clusters of classes. And that's something that Anna and I can help you identify when you're enrolling for classes, which types of areas might complement some of those concentrated interests. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anne. And Anne, I'm wondering if you could speak just a little bit about your career path and how you've drawn on your background in peace studies since graduating.
Sure. Thank you all so much for having me. My name is Anne. My pronouns are she, her. And, when I was at Notre Dame, it was an interesting experience because my first year, I was actually in pre-med and I was miserable. Nothing to do with the major itself, but just wasn't where I belonged. And I didn't really know about peace studies until my sophomore year. And by then I had already started to take political science courses, and that's what opened me up to what peace studies was and what it could be for me. And I have a passion for international affairs. And so when I was taking peace studies courses, I focused on, courses that were, geared towards international affairs. But the thing is, at the time, I was definitely struggling with what I was going to do after college, if I was going to go on to do more schooling, or if I was going to try and get a job, and what would jobs look like. So when I graduated in 2016, there was a lot of anxiety around graduation for me. And I remember spending a summer at the Kroc Institute right after graduating, just working as an office assistant and also having conversations with people. I had conversations with Dr. Milligraph, with Dr. Springs, with so many people, and just to kind of get an idea what options were out there for me. And I remember one professor, I can't remember who it is now, which is unfortunate, but they told me how they had, right after graduating from college, they had done a year of service with the Jesuit community volunteers. And I remember thinking at the time, like, no, that has nothing to do with peace studies. Like, I want to do peace building work. But he was pretty convincing. So I just signed up for the Catholic Volunteer Network just to see what was out there. And I didn't even finish an application for the Franciscan community volunteers, and they reached out just to have a conversation and see where I was at. And I wasn't seriously considering them until, just like, what could be the benefit of going to an FCV program when I'm really interested in international affairs? This is a domestic program, and I don't see how this will allow me to use the skills that I learned in peace studies. But then, and the focus was going to be with kids that are at risk. And I knew I liked working with kids, so that was enough of an incentive for me. So when I started working, I did the year of service from 2016 to the middle of 2017. And I learned so much from working with the young people in Minnesota. I learned how to, facilitate and teach nonviolent communication and nonviolent approach to conflict resolution. And interesting enough, that experience was actually what helped me get a job at the world's largest peace building organization called Search for Common Ground. And I started there as the development assistant, which was a fundraising capacity. And I was with the organization for about 2.5 years in the fundraising department. And, at the time, like for me, fundraising just felt like supporting the work, but not really part of, organizing or the work that was happening on the ground. And it was a great experience for me to be at a peace building organization because that's what I studied in school and I wanted to keep working in that field. But after a while, especially with like my increasing interest in social justice and activism, I started looking more at domestic programs or domestic organizations, which was such a switch for me because up until maybe last year or the year before, I just was convinced that where I needed to be was only at organizations that were focused on international work. But going back to my peace studies training, like learning about how the stuff that we learn in peace studies actually is important and necessary for what's going on in the country, I started looking more into social activism. And so I landed at this organization called Faith in Public Life. And one thing I forgot to mention is that I also had a minor in theology. So I had a peace studies major, and then a political science major, and then a theology minor. And this organization that I found does all three things. It's called Faith in Public Life. And we focus, yes, on domestic issues, but they're issues that I care about. We focus on racial equity, and gender and immigrant justice, all the above, all the things that I care about. And we do it through a faith lens. And so when I think about like my experiences from peace studies and how that kind of helped me think about just be thoughtful about what I'm going into and what inspires me, and to stay true to that rather than the fears that something else wasn't going to come along, or that I wasn't going to be able to move into professional spheres that I wanted access to, just because I felt like, oh, maybe peace studies isn't going to be respected in those spaces. But funny enough, like every space I've walked into that has, had all the things that I wanted, has helped, like the peace studies experience that I had has given me the access and the opportunities that I wanted. And, I just want to tell anyone who is afraid that if they did a peace studies supplementary major, that they wouldn't be able to get a job afterwards. I want to tell you that that's a lie. There's so many opportunities out there. For me, what has always worked is staying true to my passions, staying true to the things that I care about, and the opportunities they present themselves. Everything that I've done has led me to the next thing. And I think that oftentimes, especially at Notre Dame, there is like, I felt like there was like people didn't respect humanities much, right? But I know for me, what I was learning was such an impactful thing for me, whether it was with my political science classes, my theology courses, or my peace studies courses. I just felt like it was speaking true to who I was and building me as a person. And that has given me the resources, the tools, the skills that I need to be the person that I am today. And it's also helped me expand my thinking on what fundraising is. So at this new organization, I am a fundraiser, but I think of myself as a resource mobilizer, and as a resource organizer for the movement and the liberation of all people. And so this has been such a journey for me. And prior to this, I was just like, oh, I don't like fundraising. I don't like asking people for money. But then it's like, actually, this is organizing work. This is you helping people to understand that this is a role that you can play in this movement work, and giving people access into this movement work in a way that they probably didn't consider it as part of them being part of the movement. So I'm saying all that to say that one, staying true to your passions is really key to a successful career, to me, at least so far. And, when you start to panic, remember that, and remember that your passions will sustain you, and that there's a space for you. There's always going to be space for you, especially if you do peace studies.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. And I think what I really, you said so many great things, but I think one of the things that was really exciting, hearing you talk about reflecting back on the program, that is, common to what Marty was saying in his comments is, peace studies is a frame, right? It's not just a set of classes, it's a way of thinking, and it's a way of framing things. And I think one of the things that has been so exciting, about you and your professional trajectory is really, you're really applying that frame, and you're seeing ways that it can inform your personal trajectory, but also ways in which you engage with other people, right, in your work, and bringing them in and drawing them into movements that are really important and exciting. So thank you so much for that. I'm gonna throw one of our questions that has come up, which is a really great one, is what is the difference between peace studies and global affairs with a concentration in peace studies? And I'm gonna hand that question off first. Many of our panelists could certainly chime in on that, but I'm gonna have Anna Van Overberg, our Assistant Director for Undergraduate Studies, kick us off on that one.
Thanks, Laura. I'm happy to kind of go over the differences a little bit, and then anybody can kind of jump in as they would like to. I mean, I think it's a challenging question. There are a lot of similarities and overlaps between those sort of two ways of coming at these questions. I think one of the things that you'll find is different about peace studies is the way in which it attempts to sort of really question some of the existing structures and systems that exist in the world, social systems, economic systems, political systems. So rather than just sort of assuming that these are the structures and systems within which we're working and that problems have to be solved within those structures, peace studies is going to give you the tools to really imagine and think, are there other ways we could be doing these things that do promote more justice and lead to less violent conflict? So on a kind of deeper level, that's a little bit of the difference. I think in peace studies, you're gonna learn a lot about how to ask some really challenging questions of the types of things we use to shape our social and economic and political worlds. On a practical level, the supplementary major in global affairs is a bit larger than a supplementary major in peace studies, so it's more credit hours, 30 versus 24. And the concentration in peace studies is only 5 classes of that major, that supplementary major. So certainly with a peace studies major or minor directly, you have a little more space to do and a little more flexibility to explore more things within peace studies as opposed to having that be just a sort of sampling within larger global affairs. And in global affairs, I think you'll get a little bit heavier emphasis in your core requirements on like global cultures and politics and economics. And it's not that you can't come at that stuff from peace studies. I mean, you can certainly get a lot of that from peace studies, but if you're explicitly looking for courses that you kind of check off in those boxes, that's something you'll want to consider. But I do think that peace studies pushes a little bit beyond global affairs in the way that it sort of forces you to think differently about the world that we're inhabiting and try and imagine a very, very different world, and then how do we get there?
Can I chime in on that?
Please.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. So I was participating in some of the conversations about the development of the new global affairs undergraduate major. And I just want to kind of reinforce a couple of things that Anna just said, maybe add one or two. The global affairs major with a peace studies concentration will be first and foremost global affairs, which is oriented toward or anchored in political science, economics, and then cultural studies of various forms. So cultural studies kind of covers a whole lot of territory, but it's one of the 3 of the anchoring sets of requirements that you would have to take courses in. So in that sense, the global affairs major really kind of orients the student towards political science and economics. And then peace studies is kind of like the supplemental or like the icing on the poli-sci econ cake, if you will. Whereas peace studies as a supplemental major or a minor, I mean, I think the value, or one of the key differences in my view, the value is the flexibility it affords, because the requirements are fewer in the sense that you'd have the intro, the perspectives course at the junior level, and then the senior seminar. And beyond that, you really can design your own path through the strategic peace building wheel that I presented. Now, keep in mind, on that strategic peace building wheel, if I could, I still can't figure out how to share my screen in the right way. So, but if you recall the wheel, one of the segments on the wheel was global development. So, if to major in peace studies is to open yourself towards designing a path, if you so choose, of concentration within your peace studies major that focuses on global development, that focuses on policy, which the global affairs major also has an orientation towards. So all that's afforded to you in the peace studies major, but it comes with a greater deal of flexibility, and the intro class is designed to orient you to all that is available. So when I do my, my 31 flavors class, at each point, I'm inviting sometimes professors, Notre Dame professors, to come in and offer brief presentations on the ways that their work and their courses offer greater depth on the particular topics and subject matter that we're looking at in any particular session. But also, I am looking to advise students and direct you towards the courses and faculty who you can work with to go into greater depth and to help you design a concentration or particular path that you're drawn towards within that broader strategic peace building circle. So the key, I think to bring it back to where I started, one of the key differences is the flexibility that's afforded by the peace studies major, and that development is one piece on the outer circle that you can, and at any point in any of those sectors, you can come at from a political science orientation or an econ major, but in the global affairs major, those are the orienting center. So you're going to have to do your econ, you're going to have to do your basic poli-sci, and then you can do the other things. Whereas in peace studies, you can do those if you want to, but development, policy, those things, you get to kind of have a greater say in the nature of your focus, your concentration, your path.
Great, thanks for that addition. I'll tack on one more, I think, distinguishing feature, and that is, across the school, there's a different range of applications for all of these different things that you're learning in classes. And one thing that is really central to peace studies is this reflexive relationship between research and practice. And I think one thing that has been really exciting to see our undergraduates engage in is opportunities at that intersection between peace research and peace education and peace practice. So we have students who are participating in facilitating interreligious dialogues, or climate action, or when I teach my intro class, we have a paired community-based learning component. So people are involved, in practice in South Bend. And so I think the peace studies major also frames the relationship between research and practice in a particular way that affords some clear kind of opportunities related to both professional development and social change, and kind of the intersection between all of those different things.
Could I add one more thing? I'm sorry, I meant to mention it, but the one last thing I wanted to add to the emphasis upon peace studies enabling you to design your own concentration path through the orientation provided by the peace building wheel is kind of recognition of the indispensability of the humanities and the arts in peace studies, because as a supplemental major, it pairs perfectly as you design it and feel kind of directed or compelled by your questions and your passions, as Anne so helpfully put it, with FTT, film, theater, and television, or literature, literary studies, even the fine arts. These all contribute to the broader conception of strategic peace building in a way that I think, as it's currently designed, at least, the global affairs major doesn't really. I think I don't think it would be able to accommodate that or supplement it so seamlessly, perhaps. That's just me. But thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here, so maybe I will go around to each of our panelists, and if you could just give me kind of a 1 minute, anything else you wanted to add that has come up in our conversation, and then also if you don't have anything, or even if you do, in addition, we have a great question about what's the most important or interesting thing you've worked on. So I will just maybe say a 30-second, what's most exciting to you right now that you're working on in peace studies. And then if people have additional questions, feel free to enter them into the chat, and I'll do just a couple minutes of wrap up at the end. So let's maybe, we'll go in the opposite order that we did for the start. So let's start with Anne.
Okay, so I think I'm glad that you asked this question, because Right now, the thing with fundraising is that with every other system, there is racism within it. And so a lot of Black-led organizations, especially the ones that are in the front line of, justice and fighting for equality, are often not receiving the funding that they deserve. And so they either sometimes don't even know that the fundings exist, and they don't have access to these spaces, or they'll apply and their ideas are too leftist or too unconventional. And so what happens is like where the nonprofit world is continuing to perpetuate systems of inequality and racism. And so one of the things that my organization is doing is thinking about really practical ways to be in solidarity with Black-led organizations and what that looks like sustainably. And so we had a series of conversations with Black leaders and organizers, and we asked them, like, what are some of the barriers you're facing in philanthropy, and what can a white-led organization do to support you? And of course, they needed more skills building trainings and things like that, as well as flexible funding that allows them to do the work that they are on mission to do. And because of that, we have actually taken on the responsibility of regranting some of the money that we receive. And so that's an exciting thing for me to be working on, because it's not something that a lot of nonprofits do, especially white-led organizations. And for us to be doing this in such a critical moment, and moving on it pretty quickly too, because I know I have been in situations where we just talk about progress and what we're going to do, but we never actually do it. So in this moment, we are moving forward with supporting Black-led organizations financially. We're thinking about a framework to do this that is, one, equitable, and it's also, there's an easy access. So a lot of the times, and I'll say this and I'll move on, a lot of the Black-led organizations might have maybe 3 or 4 people working there. And a grant process could take weeks because it's so convoluted and so complicated that people just don't have time to do it. And also do the organizing work that they're doing on the ground. So they just end up opting out from applying in the first place. So what we're trying to do is make sure that our grant writing process is easy, it's accessible, and it meets the organizers where they are, rather than making things easy for us on the administrative side. So that's one exciting thing that I'm working on.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. Marty, just a couple closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, first of all, Anne, that was fabulous. But I think for me, looking at the world today, right, I think of 2020 was the year with the highest number of anti-transgender murders, the highest number of transgender non-conforming people murdered for being trans, the overwhelming majority being Black transgender women. So, right, this is not just a social question, this is a peace studies question. That how can we protect people? How can we value people? How can we respect and center their identity and who they are? But how can we change the systems and the structures and the culture that led to this discrimination in the first place? So in peace studies, like I said, we're not just looking to end violence, we're looking to pursue peace. And I think in a lot of social issues like that one, we have to center race, we have to center gender, we have to center sexuality, we have to center class in this kind of intersectional lens. And we have to use all the peace studies tools in education in order to properly solve this crisis and properly solve this challenge. I think that is just one social issue today that peace studies that could benefit so much from peace studies students. And so, yeah, that's kind of all I have to say. And that is I challenge people to really think and use their peace studies education to solve complex issues.
Thank you so much for naming that, Marty. That's really important.
Yes, thank you, Marty. And Jason, are you still with us?
I am, though. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Maybe a 30-second final thought?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for me as faculty person, I mean, I think you've just witnessed it from Anne and Marty. For me, the thing that one of the things I'm working on right now and am so energized by in peace studies is the ability to work with such remarkable students who go on to graduate and do on such remarkable things. And you know, what's unique about the opportunity in peace studies is that the students come and consult with us, and we get to help you and discover your passion and your path, and discover where you can intervene in the world to make some positive difference as a result of what you study in this subject matter. And that inspires me and challenges. We are challenged by our students. We're challenged to grow and to develop, continue to expand our curriculum to attend to, for instance, intersectional peace building. So this is the remarkable thing that I experience, and I'm so pleased to see on display in what Anna's had to say and what Marty has shared as well. So thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. It's great to talk to both of you, Marty and Anna. I thought it was just last year that I saw you in my class. I can't believe it. Sounds like it's been 4 or 5 years. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, don't say that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been a pleasure to be on here with all of you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for being here. It was a great conversation, and thanks to all of our attendees. We hope you keep in touch. We're excited about peace studies. We would love to hear from you after this. Please feel free to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and Anna will be on Instagram this evening answering any questions following our session. And of course, we're happy to set up meetings to chat with you more about peace studies and how it might work with your interests and goals going forward.
Bye, everyone. It was very nice to join you
and
and have this conversation. And you too.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're doing such wonderful, amazing things. It's really inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.